All right, Feinstein, you ready?
Yes, Marcy.
All right, very good. All right, we're going to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order and rise to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Dr. Francis, second. Mr. Neal. All right, any discussion? All those in favor? 7-0, thank you very much. All right, so the first order of business brought up the large crowd of the night. Thank you, Western team. So it's the Western Middle School Avid Magnet theme plan. I don't know if you all want to crowd around the microphone, that might help matters. And then Ralph, I don't know if you want to kick it off.
Yes, Dr. Carabillo sends her regrets that she couldn't be here tonight to introduce the Western team in their proposal, but her son and her daughter-in-law had a baby this morning, and so she was going to come down, but I said, yeah, pretty much go home, go sleep. So we have our Western team here tonight, led by Mr. Feinstein. And they have a proposal for us, and here we go.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Let's get it up. So, well, to be honest,
I told you not to do this.
I thought it would be too Gordon today. Let's see what that meant. There are other places I'd rather be, but I am excited to speak to all of you about our success at Western over the last several years, what we attribute that success to, and an opportunity to perhaps accelerate the work. Would be our kid Matt 7th grade. Yep. Kim is a 7th grade science teacher, and Erin Montague, a 7th grade guidance counselor at Western, who will be leading the work we have done to grow the AVID program. We have some prepared remarks, a short video, and then I'm happy to answer any questions you might ask. So I'll start. So we're here today as a result of the district's racial balance plan and the opportunity to rebrand Western's Magnet team. The district's initial attempt at drawing students from the eastern and central areas of town was the implementation of the IB program at Western in 2013. For a variety of reasons, some internal, some external, IB was not the draw initially anticipated to attract students and struggled to energize the staff. We came to you last February and discussed the possibility of rebranding the Western Magnet program. Since that time, we've taken a very close look at our school, both of what is working, where we need to grow. We have delved into the data, spoken with staff, parents, and students, looked closely at student work, and surveyed parents as well. Our conclusion is that much of the growth we are enjoying, from test score growth to a rise in parent satisfaction to a healthier school climate, is in good part due to our investment and belief in AVID and what it offers our students. As a result, it became evident to us that the best magnet theme was one we were already implementing to a degree. Now, to be clear, we're just scratching the surface of what AVID could be at Western. We were excited about what we can become, given the opportunity to implement AVID school-wide with fidelity. This is a program that has proven results, has staff buy-in, aligns with district priorities, and once we go school-wide and can truly focus on the AVIDization of Western, we believe that this system can and will draw students from across the district.
The staff at Western believes in the AVID program and what it can do for all students. The support for implementing AVID strategies school-wide has grown organically over the past 4 years since the rollout of our first elective class with the support of the Greenwich Alliance for Education. Teachers trained at Summer Institute come back to school in the fall energized and eager to put into action various AVID strategies such as Socratic seminars, one-pagers, philosophical chairs, and focused note-taking. As more of my colleagues began to use these strategies, we quickly saw the benefits for all students, and additional staff asked for training and support in implementing AVID strategies in their own classroom. When given the opportunity to choose a focus for their individualized professional learning program this year, the vast majority of the WMS staff chose to learn about AVID strategies. As a result of this staff support, a few of AVID strategies such as the one binder system, Cornell Notes, and the critical reading approach have been rolled out school-wide over the past couple of years. Students have been explicitly taught the importance of organizing their materials and are seeing the results of how it sets them up for success in the classroom. The use of AVID's critical reading strategy has aligned the language and process that teachers use when reading regardless of content or discipline. We have also begun to use advisor-based to teach all the students the importance of setting short and long-term goals, time management strategies, and the development of a growth mindset. Teachers have seen the added value in using AVID strategies to raise the expectations for all students, while also increasing student engagement and independence in the classroom. Students are being explicitly taught how to read, write, and speak using academic language, as well as how to collaborate and communicate effectively with their peers.
So what's the point here, and why is my child better off attending Western Middle School, the AVID school, versus the school that we are districted for? AVID School-wide is different than the elective class program that Greenwich is familiar with to this point. The system is built on 4 domains: systems, leadership, instruction, and culture. And when these components work together, a student's academic literacy and potential is not just supported, it is accelerated. The majority of AVID strategies capitalize on student habits of executive functioning, which historically are points of difficulty for preteens and teenagers throughout all communities, not just ours, as this is the part of the adolescent brain that continues to develop into their early 20s. This is something that we believe in explicitly teaching and helping students with, to formulate habits of organization, time management, planning ahead, decision-making, and more. Learning in our classrooms has become intentional as we help students to make connections for why we take notes a certain way, and when and why we study in groups or individually, even if the student's interest in sound and light waves will go no further than this lesson or unit. As an example, AVID's focused note-taking strategy teaches students about the forgetting curve, the retention of material, and its transformation into knowledge after the second, third, and fourth exposure. The focus is not on the format in which the notes are taken, but rather what pieces of information are important, how to organize your notes, how to go back in and review or rephrase your teacher's words, and how to work with classmates to welcome different points of view from the same lesson. The freedom to choose a note-taking format but arrive at the same lesson objectives is one of many ways that AVID School-wide and its instructional strategies so closely align with our district's initiative of personalized learning and a student-centered classroom. Students exposed to AVID School-wide are capable of generating higher-level questions to challenge one another and facilitate their own class-wide discussions and debates. AVID School-wide supports the district's work on social-emotional learning, as an AVID school aims to mimic and support a family relationship where students and staff trust one another, know one another, challenge one another to be their best selves, and support one another through daily challenges and life lessons. Exposure to a college-going culture across the building will also set us apart as unique from other middle schools. Among other things like career exploration, we are giving our students access to and guidance through virtual college tours and conversations about college prerequisites and the process at large. The question remains, though, how is a student's experience special or unique after attending WMS, the AVID school, rather than one of the other middle schools in town? So we invite you all to be our guests and see Western at work for yourselves, but in the meantime, we have a short video to help make all of this talk and text a lot more tangible.
AVID School-wide transforms the school through the lens of 4 major domains: systems, leadership, instruction, and culture. Implementing the AVID School-wide system at Weston will mean that all 4 of these components are working together, but each will play a vital role in the rebranding of Weston into becoming an AVID school, as opposed to a school that simply does AVID. From a systems perspective, Western's mission statement and vision will be centered around AVID. From scheduling to open house to field trips and assemblies, it will be palpable and evident in everything we do. Within our system, the leadership domain will support funding and time given to professional development around AVID. Leadership observations, while still operating under the temple guidelines, will explicitly evaluate the use of AVID strategies within instruction and provide growth goals in this area. In terms of instruction, Western will follow the exact same curriculum as the 2 middle schools. We will deliver much of the curriculum to the vehicle of AVID instructional strategies, with a strong emphasis on AVID's staples of instruction: writing, inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading, or WICR. Culturally, the atmosphere of Western will highlight a college-going culture, provide career exploration, celebrating the high achievement and academic growth of all students, as well as the determination and mindset of individual development.
Western Middle School, as an AVID school, is special because the fundamental skills taught by AVID are the bases of students' growth as readers, writers, learners, and collaborators.
In order for many of these strategies and our students to be successful, having a smaller grade level united team, consistent daily team meetings, and continuous professional development in content area departments and as a whole staff are critical. These teams allow us to get to know the students better and follow their progress in multiple content areas. And the team time is a vital part of this design. In our team meetings, we have had the opportunity to create cross-content area lesson plans and design activities for students to engage in higher level thinking and communication. An example of this was our recent grade level Socratic seminar. To make the grade level Socratic seminar happen, our team spent several weeks laying down the footwork, planning what strategies would be taught in each class, gathering various resources in each content area that would complement each other, organizing the time the students would spend together, and developing how the students would be assessed. We even practiced a Socratic seminar in one of our after-school staff development meetings, and discussed our experience in our team meeting to design the most effective seminar for our students.
Socratic Seminar in particular was a special mode of expression because the intimacy of the setting made it so that any student inclined to take a back seat was being pushed in two ways. First, by the co-pilot behind them as they submitted ideas using Post-its, and then second by their peers who, at the table, were incentivized by the scoring rubric to get everyone involved.
AVID school-wide promotes high levels of rigor, social-emotional understanding, and provides students with the skills necessary to be successful in a student-centered environment. AVID school-wide is larger than the elective class program. It is a system that impacts all students within the building.
Discussion, board member? Anybody wants to start? No?
I have, but I'll let others know.
Why don't you get up here? Can you use the mic? Sorry.
Anybody else have?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. You're first. Please go ahead.
I have a couple questions, so maybe I'll give you one and then we'll go around and, can you elaborate a little further on how AVID school-wide is different than AVID elective? Because right now you're running AVID elective already anyway. It's a lot of the, some significant parts of the, well, some important parts of the district are already running AVID elective successfully, right? So can you talk specifically about, yeah, I mean, I get it, they both mirror the same principles, so on and so forth. Can you talk about that? And then I have a follow-up to that one.
Sure, so just to frame this a little bit, I'm the AVID coordinator at Western, and so I oversee the implementation of the elective class within our system. Right now, AVID develops a specific curriculum that within the AVID elective, all students are taught. So they deliver us a week at a glance, they have specific strategies the students have to learn intensely, and so that whole elective class period takes time just learning different strategies of public speaking and the focus note taking, really diving into different strategies that help students. The system is slightly different because it's weaved into the regular curriculum that the district already sends out through all of our wonderful teachers. So by delivering AVID strategies, we are getting through every single classroom and every different content area. Where in an AVID elective class, if we're teaching focus note taking, we may be teaching it on an article about why early college exposure is important. So it just differs based on the fact that we're delivering through academic content versus exploratory text and topics that are coming through AVID.
Okay, and for AVID school-wide, I know AVID elective's been around for a while. AVID school-wide is, I don't want to say newer, but it's not, may not be new. I don't know how new it is, but it's newer. Do you know where else it's been implemented in a school system that has our demographic?
Yes, actually. So AVID school-wide is a relatively new concept. It's something that AVID restructured about 2 years ago. And rather than evaluating on 11 essentials, they began this conversation about 4 domains. So the current certification tool has you rate whether or not you're reaching school-wide implementation rather than just implementation. There is a school in White Plains that does have similar demographics, and one that's hosting a showcase in early March that we plan to
Do you know the
attend.
name of that school?
The Highland Middle School.
I don't know. White Plains? Okay. Do you know of any others?
None that are close to us. This is a relatively new concept for the Northeast, but down south.
Can you call them and ask them for any references relating that are, call Avid and ask them for any, because they now have, I think, 6,000 schools using Avid elective.
Right.
I'd be interested to hear if you can call them and say, do you have reference schools? I know they, for example, they use Avid School-wide in Wichita, but that's a school with a 48% graduation rate, right? I can imagine it would be perfect for that, right? I'm wondering, one that kind of looks more like we do.
I actually, just in our area, there's one in Millville, New Jersey, which is close to Philadelphia. And then there's a couple upstate New York. So we have asked, what is the closest place that we can go and see this?
Maybe there's
school-wide?
another one wider afield. If you'd ask, that would be great.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Ms. Olson, then Ms. O'Neill, and Ms. Dayton.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First, I was going to, these are all fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic to, because I've seen that a lot of students show up middle school, high school. I never taught note-taking strategies. I studied, but that's just, looking at your phone and also a piece of paper at the same time doesn't make it necessarily help anybody retain the information. So it's fantastic, and I applaud you for doing it. I feel like these are things, I guess my question is more broad. Why aren't we taking these practices and applying them to all of our middle schools? All of our schools, actually, you're basing off a growth mindset, you're teaching about executive functioning skills, you're making sure those are implemented, from what, if I understand correctly, implemented into each classroom, not based on assumptions that people just know how to take notes. Why are we not, and how can we get there? What are the steps to take to make sure that this reaches all of our schools? Yes, it helps achievement gaps with a lot of things, but it can help everyone if we adopted this mindset, this way of teaching in all of our schools. So how do we get there?
That may be above my pay grade to answer.
It's a general question.
I think to some extent these things do exist to a degree in each of the schools that are in this town. I think what Avid does is kind of systematize it for us. And it has clear metrics in which to measure how we're doing in these areas. So I think that's at the level that we're invested in. But I wouldn't say that there's not a growth mindset at the other two middle schools, but we are explicit in what we're doing and directed in how to do so by the Avid program.
Ms. O'Neill.
Congratulations on your scores and your report. It was very, very informative and easy to read. So I have a couple questions. One of them is, have you tracked your kids' success as they've gone on to the high school? And I don't know if you have an answer to that or not.
They're successful.
Well, let me just add, have all the kids coming out of Western who've been in your Avid program so far been eligible for the high school program, Avid program?
There's a whole separate, the high school has their own separate application process, so we don't want to guarantee that one leads to the other.
Right.
I know that our first year, the class went through, I think it was 100% of the kids who had applied had gotten to the high school. Not every kid's appropriate for the high school that may be appropriate for Western Avid, but for the most part, we're in the 90-95% of our kids who are in the Avid at Western are able to make it to the high school level. Is that accurate?
Okay, so then my second question, and that's good, my second question is, have you tracked their success in the high school? Have you followed these kids through and said, these are our Avid kids and this is how well they've done, or they've done? Because it's a good support for what you're doing.
Yeah, we do. They actually, they do come down, the Avid high school staff and our staff have a very good relationship, and we come down and talk about which kids are doing well as we look about our Avid selection process, for example, and their selection process. So we do talk about all the kids as they come down. We do follow their success. We follow their grades, their test scores. Yes, we do.
So you have data?
The data exists, yes.
Okay.
Ms. Dayton.
Thank you for the proposal. I'll give you my pros and cons and then ask you to challenge me on the cons. So the pros are it's wonderful for students to learn these skills in middle school. I understand why at that point in development it's so critical to hit the middle school level. I think it's wonderful for parents. Parents will now be better guides for their children as they also learn the same strategies that their children are learning. I think it's wonderful for educators as well. It's a wonderful system for educators to follow and to provide cohesion to the academic program. The cons, as I see it, in my own personal view, is in the past we were thinking about STEM and STEM careers. This program seems English language arts dominant. In my view, I want you to challenge me on that. Also, I am thrilled to hear about the career explorations part of the AVID program, but it wasn't fleshed out very much in the video. And I'd like to delve further into that because that could allay some of my concerns, I think, about losing our focus on the quantitative world. Your test scores are amazing, but we could use more help in math than we could use in English language arts. That's not a critique, it's just across the district. So those are the pros, those are the cons. Please challenge me and tell me how we can fit all of these great ideas together to make a really successful program.
I know that is a science teacher.
So just to give you a little bit of background about where I came from. So this is my third year here in Greenwich, and prior to coming to Greenwich, I worked in Westport for 11 years. And when I came to Greenwich, I learned about this new AVID program. So AVID's been around for a while, but to me, I didn't know about it. AVID has completely changed the way that I structure my class. And while it seems like it's very heavy in the language arts perspective, it is very easy to implement into both science and math, and I truly believe that it will continue to help students achieve high levels and reach those STEM careers because it's teaching them the soft skills that are necessary regardless of the profession that they desire to go to. Those interpersonal skills, the ability to collaborate, to be a creative thinker, to be able to communicate their findings. I don't think that not having a STEM school limits their ability. I actually think that this will enhance their ability. They'll find passions, they'll learn different points of view and learn how to accept a different point of view, like we saw with the Socratic seminar example. It was kind of a science-based piece. It was how does the world prepare for natural disasters? So even in language arts, they took a science perspective on it. So it really kind of was very interdisciplinary, and that's kind of, AVID has that ability to lend itself in that way.
And a follow-up after someone else asks, when you get to it, I'd like to know more about career exploration.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I can do that.
I just handed my phone.
That's your choice.
So the way that we do a lot of career exploration in the AVID elective right now could be a way that we mimic that throughout the school. Our AVID elective kids do what we call a bell ringer at the beginning of class. On Monday, it's a quote, and they're able to dive into it and talk about what those words mean to them. Maybe it's a lyric or a quote from a historian or an artist. On Tuesday, they talk about creative work, so it could just be a picture taken of a painting or a statue. One of the days of the week is career exploration. And so while they talk about what that looks like, they might identify top colleges some of the people in this profession would go to, or majors that are associated with that. So it does go hand in hand a lot with our career and college exploration go hand in hand. But the career exploration, we would love to see it, we envision it expanding by having professionals in our community come and speak to the kids and identifying what different careers are. So we have a ton of wealth management professionals in our community. Our kids have no idea what that means. So what does that look like? Where could you study? What might you major in? How does that translate to the work you're doing now? And we would prepare all of those speakers to what it is that our AVID kids do or our kids at large do, and how can they help deliver the message that here is what the skills are that they're working on. Can we relate? What do you remember? How does this mode with what you do every single day at school and at work?
So, I've been to a number of AVID events, both through my time on the board and through the Alliance. I'm going to say my favorite is the contract signing, because the students actually have to make a commitment to the program. And the parents are typically there. They're all making a commitment to the program. So I guess my first question is, how does that work if you're doing AVID school? You're still going to actually have to go through that, or you don't go through that? I mean, how do you get that buy-in? Because I've been there at the high school, and I've heard the talk to the students. They realize this is a true commitment. It is a contract that they will follow through on those sort of things.
So we would continue to implement the elective, and the contract signing, I think, is specific to that, because along with that extra elective class and the curriculum that the students are uncovering every day, there are field trips and opportunities galore. You know, big part of the AVID elective is giving these kids prior knowledge and exposure that they don't have at the dinner table, and you know, about the college process, about careers, about different opportunities in the community. And so that contract signing, I think, would remain special and specific for the elective students. However, we would be showing the kids how different incentives can be involved for following through on AVID expectations. And I think that that's where our previous work in PBIS and incentivizing being a good student and doing the right thing can be highlighted as well.
So just to make sure I understand that completely, the entire school will get the strategies which will be baked in with the curriculum, but for kids who opt into the elective program, there's additional things that will go along.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Francis.
So first, I mean, I think the successes at Western have been great, and I'm really excited about that. And I think it's also exciting to have that teacher buy-in and the desire to do this, and I think that's huge. I think it's great that there's been the 16 magnet students that have come in. So take the next comments with that introduction in mind. You know, one of the things I have to say is I was reading it and I kind of worked myself back, but I had a little bit of a sense that the process wasn't what I expected. And so I had to kind of rethink it. You know, the process I had sort of expected was more of what is our district looking for in terms of a magnet? Where do we want to go in terms of a magnet? What's going to draw students there? And so I do think there's sort of a sense of needing to balance those two issues. I'm excited to see what's going on here, and I feel like that's kind of pulled me back from that, but I still think that's something to think about. I think one of the concerns that you guys had written here, and I would love to see maybe in the process how we try to address that, is the sense that, you know, AVID is, you know, and has been promoted as, you know, kids coming from families that don't have that college experience or come from an environment where we need to address some of those issues for them or give them experiences they might not otherwise have. So how is this going to apply to everybody? And as I looked at the comments and the quotes, you know, is it something where we can look at how do the ALP teachers feel about it, or how do the advanced math and science teachers feel about it, or how do other people in the greater community feel about it? And I understand the limitation because they may not have the information to truly understand it, but I think particularly given that this is meant to be a magnet theme, kind of how do we address those things? So that's, I think, part of the concern.
Yeah, and very fair. Things we've thought about as well. One thing I noticed too, and you saw it with the numbers, we had more students apply in the previous 4 years when we had an identified theme. Success will bring kids to Western, and part of what we're thinking is that AVID is a large part of the success. That being said, in this community, AVID is viewed as for a certain population, which I may be or not be. But I think one of the things we haven't done in the past, and we certainly talked about already, is, you know, rather than have a magnet open house and invite them to come, we can go there. There's no reason we can't go to every elementary school that doesn't feed into Western, isn't fortunate enough to feed into Western. And, you know, spend time saying, this is what AVID can do. This is why we think AVID is good for all kids. The executive functioning pull in and of itself for most middle school families when their kid can't find their left sneaker or what they brought home for lunch that day, they understand. And I think that piece of it alone will be a draw for a lot of parents. And again, as long as the success continues, as long as the scores keep going the way they're going, plus that added incentive of a specialized approach, I think will draw.
Ms. Stones and Mr. Sher.
You sure?
Go ahead. Mine's on that same point. Or do you want the same point?
Yeah, basically. Well,
Okay,
no,
go ahead.
no, continue, because actually I was going to get a little bit. Go ahead.
So I'm going to build on that question. So this is my second question. I don't see it here, and I don't see it in the schedule that's on this page. When, do we already have, or is there a plan to do market research survey of the target audience? Let me give you the quick with this. I absolutely think you should go have it school-wide, and you should do it for the school community at Western. I fully support it. Okay, go ahead and do it. That would be where I would be. If this came before me today, I would do this for Western. It's ideal for the majority of the kids that we have in that catchment area already. And I 200% agree that the things that are the principles would be applicable to kids that Abbott, as a program built nationally, was not targeted for. I got that part. The title of this is Magnet Theme. Okay, we already have as a district a very deep market research about what will get people to move. Maybe you guys haven't seen it, you're not familiar with it, but it was done at great expense. We know when people will move and when they will move. This wouldn't be on that list. Okay, so I appreciate the optimism, but we need hard data talking to, because here's the other, this is why I hate this subject, because I can't believe in 2008 we're classifying children by race. That's just unbelievable to me. But that is the reality of the state of Connecticut. That's the state has done that to us. So guess what? I mean, let's call racial balance what it is. You need to get white children, I can't even believe I'm saying these words, to leave Eastern Middle School and to leave Central Middle School and come to Western. They've got to get on a bus, leave their neighborhood, leave the kids they were in their elementary school, and come over here, right? We've got to understand the interests and needs of those parents and those students. If the subject is magnet, which I'd rather not be talking about magnet, I'd rather be talking about school improvement, which is what you guys are really doing an incredible job doing. Do more of that. But unfortunately, this subject is magnet. So what's important to me is to understand, do you have new data that is different than what we've had before, that says, for this, there are the parents in the target audience who will stick their kid on a bus to cruise across town and get out of their neighborhood school. So I don't know, do you already have that? My guess is you don't.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, somewhere in this plan, I couldn't vote on a new magnet theme without knowing that, right? It wouldn't make any sense to me to vote on that. Maybe my 7 other colleagues would gladly do it. If this came forward as a school improvement, you could bring it at the next meeting and I'd vote for it. So I think these two things are mixed up. And originally, let me just finish off, I've seen this movie before. The movie before was ISD parents are in IB and they desperately want to continue with IB. That was the way it was presented to the board. I was on the board, and we know all of these parents will park their kids on a bus if they just had an IB middle school program. Well, guess what we did? We created an IB middle school program at Western. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, right? It didn't pan out the way we thought it would. So if in the context of magnet, I would need to see Gordon, and I would really be talking to Ann about this because this is beyond just you, if Ann were here, but I understand she had a great family event. Good for her, congratulations. But I would need to understand that and see that before this came back. So if you could figure out how to maybe include that in your plan, if that hasn't already been done, it needs to get done as part of this project, I think. Maybe others will disagree.
Okay, Ms. Stowe.
you want to respond?
I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I agree with you, Gordon, that success sort of brings people. And it seems that perhaps this is an element of your success. And I happen to know some of those, just anecdotally, 16 children that chose to go there this year. A lot of them were in the Parkway sort of central catchment area, and they thought that the style of your approach, the scheduling changes, things like that worked better for their children. And I know that anecdotally that's why a lot of them went there. But I have to say, I do want to understand, and I know you did the survey of the Western parents of AVID versus Innovation Lab versus STEM. And I know we saw as a board the Innovation Lab idea, I don't know, a year ago now or something like that. I would like to see those ideas fleshed out a little bit more. I mean, of course, I know STEM is sort of, the hot topic in every town and city. But it's a hot topic, and it's certainly it would attract a lot of parents, I suspect, willing to put their kids on a bus to maybe go to Western. And so I do think that while AVID is an amazing program, and I have to agree with Peter, especially for the cost, which seems not minimal, why not do it school-wide tomorrow at your school? But for the magnet, I would sort of like to maybe survey the wider community, not just Western, but also if we could really flesh out, and I don't think we have to look at B anymore. We've done that, didn't seem to work. But Innovation Lab, STEM, anything else I'm not thinking about, humanities program, I don't know. But I'd like to sort of have a few choices when looking at this magnet theme.
I'm struggling with this a little bit, and I apologize if I'm off base here. As a building principal, I view it as my responsibility to make sure I have the best program in place for the kids in my building at the time.
100%.
And
110%.
I'm just struggling with, and I hear what you're saying, it's a magnet theme, but it's going to draw. We are a magnet. And my theory that successful draw will draw some, it will not draw hordes, because there's nothing wrong with the 2 middle schools they're going to. They're the second or third best middle schools in town, but they can be asked. They're fine. But,
Clearly number 2 and 3, right?
Clearly 2 and 3. But at the same time, we've done the IB sexy thing for a while. That did not draw at all.
Right.
I would hate to spend staff energy and lose what we have right now with the staff behind it, the momentum we have right now, exploring other options at the expense of what's already going on and meeting with success. That's, again, not unwilling to do it. This is my concern as we go forward with this.
All right, Ms. Rabin.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You have to continue to focus on what's working for the students at Western. And I think if you emphasize all the system, that was really compelling to me. I wrote it down twice. I don't know if I'm a good Cornell note taker, but I know that those executive functions and those other items, that a lot of kids struggle with that, and especially boys. I only have sons, so I can only talk about what boys struggle with. And that would have been like awesome, because it really delays their ability to be successful at the high school. It sets them behind. And I think there are probably parents that would be willing to make that investment, because you can't get back those years of not knowing how to do things correctly.
Dr. Francis.
So to start with a lighter note, my son Calvin, could have used a little executive functioning help today when I got home and the door to my home was completely wide open. The cold air going in. But anyway, yes, teenage boys, he's in college, so you think that hopefully by now he's done it, but no. There you go. So first I want to make a comment, and then I think it is important, I think, as a board for us to discuss kind of what our expectations are next step. I don't think we want to send people on a wild goose chase. I think we need to have a clear sense of that. Just as a kind of an aside, and maybe one of my little pet peeves, but I agree with the career exploration. I think that's a great idea. I also, and I understand the need in the AVID elective for those students to give them the perspective of college being a goal for them. But I do worry that our society has become so centered on life. And I think of this mostly at the high school, but life is building your resume for college, right? And it becomes the end all and be all. And I worry a little bit about that. I feel like it is great to talk about where do you want to go and what are you doing, but to make everything that we're doing in school about getting into college, I think is problematic. And so I would just be really careful about that component and how it impacts some kids. Particularly kids who are likely know that's where they're going, even if they're not thinking about it. I think to make it too much, that worries me a little bit. And so I do think, we talked about right tech as a goal that we have for some kids. We talk about 2-year, but also even for kids who clearly are planning to go to college, just to be careful how we address that. Just as another kind of brief question, I was sort of interested to see kind of in the timeline, the rollout, and if I got it right, I didn't take notes while I was reading it at that point, but I think I wrote down 2022, that there's sort of a year, and I thought, wow, that's kind of far out, given how much you guys are already kind of doing it school-wide, so I'm sort of curious to see, kind of what's the transition plan? I mean, you're obviously expanding it now anyway, so what's kind of your go? What's the difference between what you're doing now and that go day?
Your money. No, seriously, the budget's already done for next year. That's the difference. So you're right, we're still going to continue to do what we've been doing. The additional funding will allow us to accelerate this work, mainly through training, because the more people we get to Summer Institute, the more people we get to PATH training, more people we can have come in, more fidelity which will be delivered. That's really the only difference.
So it's kind of a percentage fidelity is sort of what you're assuming that with the money in that timeline, you'll have a high fidelity.
All right, Ms. O'Neill.
So this morning when I heard on the radio about Avid, immediately they talked about it as for kids who, families, first generation, fine. So I think you need to find a new name for it. Seriously, think about how else to pitch this. And along with that, think about your electives so that your electives could be different from those in the other middle schools, so that you have maybe electives who are more into computer science or something. So you have a niche that's different besides this is for kids who've never gone to college. Because when Dundee or ISD or whatever you want to call it, how far you want to go back, they did not start with a pure IB program because it was not popular. So they combined that, and I can't remember the other program, whether it was grade books or something or other. They were not a pure IB program in the beginning. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be a pure AVID program, but I'm saying they had a twist to make it appeal to a lot more people than would have in the very beginning. So think about how you can rename that. I think even for the kids, kids don't want to go around saying, I happen to be a first generation in my family to go to college, but I don't think kids in middle school want to go around, saying I'm an AVID kid. Maybe they do in your school, but I think for the community, you might think about renaming it.
Mr. Sher.
I was just asking our resident historian and genius on the board. True, Ralph? Right? True. So, if I'm not mistaken, maybe someone can look this up quickly. I want to say Western is not racially imbalanced, it's impending. Okay, so maybe we should be asking ourselves the question and untangle from this. Why are we even worried about having a magnet program at Western? Because if we don't have to have a magnet, and this is the right thing to do for that catchment area, just ditch the magnet conversation and let these people go forward and do the right thing to improve performance in that school. Why, maybe as a board, we need to get off this subject of this being a magnet school. Right? I mean, why? Because I think we're all, I've been on the board long enough when we went around and around on this ridiculousness, I will call it my opinion, the ridiculousness of this racial balance concept from Hartford. And candidly, we all agreed to the board members at the time, some of us were there, that we were not going to focus on this the way Hartford wanted us to focus on. We were going to focus on the academic performance of our students, regardless of their race, regardless of their economic profile. That's what we're about here in Greenwich. And if this is the right program, you guys are already ridiculously successful as an organization. Anybody who's successful, who then brings me another plan for more success, I want to get behind that person, and I don't need to talk much about it. So why couldn't we go that direction? Why do we need to even talk about a magnet theme? And why don't we take this up as something that improves that school?
Ms. Stowe?
I was kind of going in that direction, but well said. I mean, your team is excited, and when someone's excited about something, that's when you have success, right? I mean, like, you think about software programs that have been wildly successful, it's because the sales team's excited about it, right? So I agree, Peter. Go for it for $40,000. I mean, I know we had a tight budget, but let's look for it because I think it's like go forth and do your work. But if we do have to do a magnet, which you now raised the point that maybe we don't, let that be, kind of central office's job to kind of come back and figure out a few themes and present us with the pros and cons of, STEM. Or demagnetize it. They might say, forget about it, we've decided not to do anything.
Let them do what they need to do.
But I don't think you should have to work on that. You're right. Your job is to run your school. And so that's why I'm sort of pushing it back over here.
Dr. Francis?
So I just put a $sign on my page, just because I think, the one thing about magnet programs is that typically we are willing to fund them. I'm curious because I do think that even when it's impending, I thought there was some sense that you were supposed to start trying to think about how you're going to address that, and I don't recall if that's true or not, so that might be worth us double checking. And related to that is the fact that, one of the things that often comes up in terms of magnet and is, are you going to pay for transportation? So if we are worried that there is going to be issues in terms of the balance, is it worth kind of trying to figure that out now in terms of the money perspective? But I am seriously willing to think about dropping that. And then I think that really answers sort of a lot of the questions that we have, and may really be sort of in the back of our minds, let's get this fantastic success, and then maybe we won't have to sell it. I mean, I would encourage you to sell it because I think it'll be really great for people across the district to understand what it's doing, but maybe there's a different requirement in terms of why you're doing it.
So I, for one, don't want to deprive people who want to go to Western because of the success, because of your dedicated staff, because of the special programming. I want to allow people that opportunity. So I'm not actually jumping to remove the magnet name. I'm not so interested in how many people it's going to draw versus in 1 year, you've attracted 16 people. In the previous 4 years, you hadn't gotten that many. So I don't know why we would need to drop it. It's not, there's got to be a balance here. So I'm not rushing to jump on that bandwagon. I will say you've shown the success, right? Without, basically in the middle where you had no program, you're driving this, and you've already taken some of the aspects of Avid, the one binder system, I know you're working on executive function with all the kids because honestly they need it. Don't tell Tom, but I did once upon a time go to a open magnet parent night at Western, and I was impressed. I walked away impressed, and I am the only person sitting on the board who's chosen to send their kid to a magnet program. So I get a sense of what it takes. So, I don't want to walk away from magnets. Ms. Olson and Ms. Dayton.
So yes, you guys clearly have shown best practices and are successful, passionate, and I would continue doing exactly what you're doing. Only I would share it. I would share. I mean, if possible, share it with the other middle schools. Share it with everybody. I don't know what specifically you do to motivate and engage your students, but I know that I would imagine that whatever you're doing is working. I mean, we can see it at a different level. I bet it's probably less. I'm just give an example. I know, so I don't have any middle school kids, but I know that at middle school sometimes forget your pencil 3 times, it's a detention. I'd be interested to see how Avid, what the program you're doing, how you are motivating those students and how you're using choice and that it's not just lip service, but you're actually making it happen, and it's clear by your passion. So we have so many right now undiscovered talent in the form of teachers and administrators, and 3 of them are sitting right here and many behind you. Like, to go and share that, whether that's personal, professional development, but go and share what you're doing so that everybody benefits because you're doing something right. I don't know if it needs to be considered a magnet school either. I think that more importantly is sharing those practices with colleagues so they can learn from you.
Ms. Dayton.
I strongly encourage you to have another look at the career explorations piece. I'm not sure it's enough. I'm not sure having parents come in and talking about their professions is rigorous enough. I'd like to see that fleshed out. I'd like to see kids connected to on-site visits in different professions, taking them out of the classroom and getting out of the superficial level of what is it like to be a professional in this industry or that industry. I'd also like to see you increase the rigor by building into the curriculum national competitions. I really feel that these kids are ready to step up and show what they can do on a national stage. And we should set those extremely high expectations. It will only benefit the students if we do so. And I believe that will draw people to Western. I don't want to drop the magnet, as Mr. Bernstein has said. I think you have a jewel of a program to build on. It just needs to be elevated. They gave you the basics, they gave you the system. Now we need to put the Greenwich touch on it. And I think you're on a roll, so congratulations.
Ms. Reagan.
I don't want to lose the magnet concept either, because I wasn't thinking about it from a race perspective. If there's a child at Eastern or Central that could benefit, regardless of what their race was, I would want them to have that opportunity to come to Western.
Just to tag on that, I don't know how many of those 16 students that are in are from Parkway, but because of the middle school split, allowing that choice actually, I think, gives them the option of going with Western. Dr. Francis,
So I just want to clarify.
Peter, you had your hand up. Just want to make sure. Dr. Francis.
I just wanted to clarify, I think we should keep it a magnet school. I think it was, what I wanted to drop was the requirement that what we pick or that what we support has to be proven to be something that's going to draw students of a certain type. That's what I meant in terms of dropping it. I think we keep it a magnet school because I think it's great to be able to have kids come there from different places. I don't want to stop that, but what I wanted to do is change my perspective that to make a decision about where the school should focus should be based on whether students will come from other places.
Thank you. Mr. Sheriff.
Ralph, I know because of magnet programs, our policy is we pay for transportation for any student anywhere in the district, which is beyond our normal transportation network. So can you come back to us at the, or follow up with us on the actual cost of transportation for the students who are now magneted into Western?
You just want, Peter, do you just want Western or do you want all our magnets?
No. Well, yeah, that'd be great. That would be nice, but that's not the subject at hand. The task at hand is we're talking about whether to continue. I mean, they're asking for $50,000 more, right? This board just voted to take $500,000 out of teaching next year. Okay, so this is where the stuff starts to get lost in my head, right? I would fully support this program because it's an academic program that winds up improving all the kinds of skills we want, right? But it doesn't make sense to me to take $500,000 out, then continue to do magnet, which is putting money into busing. Now we don't have a budget with unlimited funds, so when someone says to me, oh yeah, keep doing that, and meanwhile then actually spend 50, I would want to trade one thing for the other. I'm looking to places where we can cut overhead and put it into teaching kids in a classroom. I'm all about that. So but I'd like to know the number. If it's de minimis, then it's de minimis. If it's significant, it's significant. If you could let us know, that would be great.
Anybody else on this topic? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your coming and presenting and the work that you've been doing and the success you've had.
Just real quick, I just want to, I know Erin mentioned her piece. She wanted to invite you all to come to Western. That was not an empty invitation. You're welcome to come at any time. But we are actually having tomorrow morning, if you do happen to be free at 8 o'clock, we're having actually one of our seminar classes presenting you some Avid strategy. So if you'd like to come tomorrow morning, we'd love to see you. But at any time. Some people are hard to work with than others, but we'll try.
We appreciate that. All right, so as your schedule says, you'd be coming back in March with more of a plan, and it would be on our agenda, and you'd be asking for approval of the new team. So obviously there were some questions and comments discussed tonight. You obviously can submit anything in writing to us and either work through Ralph and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is policy 4112, which is our hiring policy. The history on this is probably pretty clear to the board. This has bounced back and forth from PGC a couple of times, and we put it off because the idea was to have a full board discussion. What was previously presented were two options. The first was basically that the superintendent is authorized to hire all administrators and teachers, leaving no role for the board. And the second option was the other extreme, that for all certified positions authorized by the board, that the superintendent would recommend the best candidate to the board, which just seems like we had two extremes. So the idea was to have discussion tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Francis.
So I don't think we as a committee have a whole lot more to add. I think people are sort of pretty aware of the issues. I will say I brought up it really was just me as one person thought today, which was because, one of the considerations had been, are we involved at some point in the interview process, because to just be at the end when someone's presented doesn't help, and then at what point are you involved in the interview process, and is that appropriate or not? And another thing that I thought about a few days ago was, to me, I think what's sort of maybe more important is to be more specific about what characteristics or what things you're looking for in the person that's going to fill that position. Now, some of that clearly should be from the strategic plan, should be clear from that, but I do think that there are sometimes differences from one school or another. And for us to be part of that description that's being created, that then the team is looking at as they're looking at CVs that are coming through, as they're interviewing people, so that that's a piece of, the profile, that's the word I'm looking for, the profile that is created, and maybe that's sort of another way to address that, because personally I sort of feel like we shouldn't be part of the hiring process in terms of actually picking out specific candidates. I think that should be something that the superintendent and that person's designees basically are doing. But I think to be involved in the description of what kind of person we would be looking for, I think might make sense.
Ms. Rabin.
That's interesting. And I'm thinking about how we want to stick to the CAPE policies. So that would be like totally rewriting it. So that's like going in a totally different direction, which I'm a little less enthusiastic about, because we've tried to not do that for every other policy. I agree that there's some third option, neither of these are perfect. I think I'm just putting this into the corporate world, where the superintendent's boss, so to speak, and most people have their boss review the final candidates, so that's where I lean.
So I mentioned a couple of times this is brought up. I really think that there's a middle ground here, and I went to a document that helps me a lot. I went to the Constitution, and I actually tried to craft some language. I took the first option, which was the superintendent's authorized to hire administrators and teachers, but I was thinking about adding a sentence after that the superintendent shall seek the advice and consent of the Board of Education prior to the hiring of individuals who are cabinet level and building principal positions. Thinking that at least at that point we have a role to play. Now that still leaves open the question of how that would work, whether it would be a finalist, whether it would be the last two candidates. But I think at the end of the day, those are the roles that have the most impact on the district in terms of high level, what's happening, also setting the culture in the building. Obviously, I've said it out loud before, I'll say it again, teachers are the most important people. We're at the other side of the food chain. But I absolutely believe that the cabinet and principals are the right people where we ought to have a stake. And Ralph, I'd asked you if you might want to weigh in. I don't know. Your experience, I think you had said you had been interviewed at some point by a board. I think it was when you became a housemaster.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Yeah, way back when, and some of us at this table, well, just actually being married. We're both interviewed by the board prior to being appointed. I don't think it's a bad idea to bring a candidate forward. I also, to meet the board can ask questions and meet that person. I'd also like Gaetan's about getting questions from the board into the screening process so that you could have more of an impact on that whole process. So I like that piece, but I also like, yes, come and meet the board. But you guys making the decision on who's going to be hired is, we're going down a slippery slope there. We're not, we should be leaving that up to the superintendent and the educators that he has hired.
Yours. Well, whatever. Miss Stone. My wife would yell at me.
I'm speaking only as an individual, not as a PGC member, but I have to say I agree with you, Lauren, in the sense that we have adopted some, CAVE. We've gone to CAVE, and we should try to sort of stick to that. Now, I also agree that this is pretty, binary, these two choices. However, I think that we have to see what our mood is, but my belief, and I've said it 1,000 times before, is that you hire the right CEO and they hire the people below them. If you're unhappy with the CEO and the decisions they're making, then you change that CEO. So I'm of the opinion that the first option makes sense. I could maybe get comfortable with the idea of something different where you can't come up with new positions within the cabinet or something like that. That's not a decision then on an individual, and I'm not a part of the interview process, but you can't all of a sudden create something that we have to live with forever as a budgetary item. That's my bigger issue. If a new position is added that we then have to pay, salary and a pension on forever. But in terms of me going off and hiring principals and Kim Eves, and no, that's not my job. That's the superintendent's job from my perspective.
Ms. Dayton.
I'm in favor of only the first option. I've talked to a lot of board members throughout the state of Connecticut. Not a single one has differed in their opinion that it is a terrible decision for Board of Education members to hire administrators, to be involved in the hiring of administrators or the deciding on the hiring of administrators. When it comes to principals, I have no clue as to why board members think they know better than the school community what would make a good leader in that neighborhood. I have no idea why we think that we know better than the folks sitting in Byram or Cos Cob or the folks sitting in Old Greenwich who know their communities, know their families. Chickahominy. This is a town made up of micro localities that have a lot of cohesion. They have a lot of character. They have a lot of history. They have a lot of distinctiveness. And I have no clue as to why this board feels they know better than the parent-teacher leaders in that school, the educators in that school, the superintendent who has worked with that school community, hopefully over years. So I am only in favor of the first option. And I like the idea of submitting questions for the interview process. That gets no one in trouble. So I will be voting against it if we are going in the direction of the second option.
Ms. Holson.
Yeah, I tend to think that we don't want to get too into the nitty-gritty, and it can be a slippery slope. As Ralph has said, it makes sense to meet the board. If someone, as he had said, if you're interviewing, we shouldn't be meeting necessarily every single person. I think we're getting a little too in the weeds, and I think if we trust the I don't think we should be involved in every single hiring process. Now, that being said, I think Dr. Francis mentioned something earlier about submitting questions or having some language, what the board is maybe looking for, qualities in leaders in our district, administrators. But I don't think it's necessarily our job to be doing that. And that's hard for me to say because I'm like, I understand education so much, it's my life. But I don't think it's a board's job to necessarily get too into the weeds.
Ms. Raven.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying it's our job, and I'm not saying that we're the only people involved or that we know better than what a community does. I'm less probably interested in the hiring of principals, or less interested in being involved. So I'm not trying to say at all that we're responsible for the hiring, but the input, however we can get that input, because we have the expectations. That's our role, is what we expect. And I get it, get a new CEO, but we've had more change in the CEO position than we have under the CEO position. So like we're living with staffing that's been here for quite some time, and the CEO changes not because we've done anything necessarily to replace that he or she.
Dr. Francis.
So first, I'm sort of curious the purpose of meeting with the board. I mean, it seems like a nice thing to welcome somebody, but if it's not going to be part of the decision process, sort of to understand what that purpose is, and to be fairly clear if there's any aspect of that that's actually an evaluation or not. So I think if we're talking about meeting with people, I think we need to understand what that is, and I think we need to be realistic in terms of who within the district we think that would make sense for. I mean, when you talked about the sentence you created, which talks about advice, helping to create the profile or helping to create the questions certainly could be part of that. I don't know that I think it's particularly useful for us to be the approval end if the approval is going to be one person, right? I mean, I don't think that satisfies what people want in terms of, even if you do want to have input, certainly just approving the last person or meeting the last person is not particularly helpful for that. So I'm not sure approval alone, to me, would make sense, whichever side of the coin you're on.
Mr. Sheriff.
Option 2 is a remarkably bad idea. Even some modified iteration of option 2 is a remarkably bad idea. The board's responsibility is to govern the school system. It's the executives, in this case we use the term superintendent and administrators in school speak. It's their job to manage the school system. When the board, when the group that's responsible for governing starts involving themselves directly in the management, then guess what? It's totally unclear who is accountable. The board all of a sudden is now accountable because the board participated in selecting the managers underneath the superintendent. I agree with what Ms. Rabin has said, but in my experience, that problem has been created where we have had multiple superintendents, where the board has been asked for advice about cabinet level positions. It has provided that by the superintendent. It has provided that advice and guidance to the superintendent. The superintendent has ignored that advice, and it resulted in what it resulted in. So the right process is that a good chief executive officer of a superintendent would canvass their board if he or she were interested in advice based on our experience, but that's up to the superintendent to do. And then it's up to the superintendent to take in that advice or ignore that advice. If the board is unhappy with the performance of the school system and they've provided advice that was ignored, okay, for me, that would be a reason not to renew your superintendent. But that, to me, seems the proper functioning. As they say, the board's responsibility is to govern, the superintendent and the administration's job is to manage. And every time a well-meaning board tries to play manager, it doesn't work out well. As a result, I would not support option 2 or a modified version of option 2 vis-a-vis. I would gladly support advice. I wouldn't support consent.
Ms. O'Neill?
So I guess there's a question about philosophy. Are we hiring someone for a building? Or are we hiring someone for a district? If we're hiring someone for a building, we're limiting our options. And maybe that's why we have the condition of not having a strong bench. So we have to think about when we're hiring, are we hiring leaders for a district who you can use in multiple places? Or are you hiring someone who's there and that's where they're going to be forever? And that leads to some of the malaise or whatever. It leads to some of the lack of vigor sometimes when you have people who know and they're going to remain forever where they are. So that's a philosophical thing. What are we hiring for? Are we hiring a person for a position forever, or are we hiring them for the district so that they can be mobile and gain various experiences, and then we have a bench? So that's one thing. The other thing that we have is that we have, unlike other districts, we have committees of parents, GOSA reps, GEA reps. All of these people have a say about who gets hired. And we who are the elected officials of the board, who have a bigger vision and know the needs of the district, have no say. And I think that's a mistake. And at some point in this process, I think we should have a say from principals up. I think in the initial thing, giving some guidance as to the characteristics, but that could be apple pie and motherhood, like when you know. So I think at some point, the board should have a say on who it is that's going to be hired, mainly because we're the elected officials for the district, for the entire district. And we have other people who are not elected and having a much stronger say in who gets hired in the district.
Dr. Francis.
So this is sort of more of a procedure question, because we've obviously been back and forth on this a couple times. If I use my fingers and I do a little straw poll, it seems like the overall leaning is towards option 1. I guess this is a discussion item, so I was about to make a motion to get that going, but we obviously can't do that. So I don't know if we can sort of do a straw poll to then send it back to PGC with the preference, if we just leave it and then put it in as a first read with my sense of what it is, and we could sort of vote on it at PGC or do something. I'm not sure exactly what the next step should be at this point.
So process-wise, this is, I think, our 3rd or 4th read. So basically, if we put it on as an action item at the next meeting, then you can make a motion to amend, because as it was presented, it actually listed both options. So you would amend to remove the offending language and leave the remainder. I will say, as you're counting on your fingers, you don't need your toes with this board, just your fingers. I think the language of consent, right? If we cannot come to an agreement and there's not a majority by consent, I think some of that language about advice before hiring is still applicable. So I'm happy to volunteer to work with you to try to grab some language. Mr. Chair.
Candidly, I don't want any requirement from the superintendent to seek our advice. Maybe other people do. I mean, this is the thing. I don't like these back doors that are effectively insinuating us into the process, because this is where it's up to the superintendent. A smart superintendent's going to get our advice and point of view. A not so smart superintendent's not gonna do that. But he or she has to own it, has to be accountable to it. And this idea of like, anything you write in there, guess what, guys? You just smeared the accountability peanut butter on the board. And we're either gonna hold our top officer to account, or we're gonna create a really murky environment with vague language that is just, don't do that. And we're better off speaking clearly, without ambiguity. And by the way, if people want to say, I demand participating in that process to whatever level, then say that. But let's not come up with something innocuous and vague that is that's just a recipe for trouble, and we shouldn't do it.
All right, any other, Ms. Olson?
No, I just, I could be comfortable with the language as is in the first option. I know we're just getting a sense of the board, but I could, I think there's some validity in that, and not necessarily saying they have to meet the board or seek our advice. It might be something, you know, like more of a goal, a board goal towards to the superintendent. Is a little bit, would be, might be more appropriate there as something we mentioned before.
Dr. Francis?
I was just going to say, maybe from tonight, my thought would be put it in with option one, and then if someone wants to put an amendment in that can be voted up or down for some adjustment, then that's what we do, and that would be my sense of the meeting.
Okay. Yeah. All right, well, thank you. Unless there's something else on that topic. Next up would be the update for Mr. Mayo on the variety of Parks and Rec MOUs, the ones that are valid and the invalid ones.
Okay, so back in November, late November, I met with the Director of Parks and Recreation, and much to my surprise, he handed me an MOU that was not dated June of 1998, it was dated February 1st, 2016. So there is an updated memorandum of understanding between the Town of Greenwich and the Board of Education, Parks and Recreation. I don't believe this board ever, or any board ever, saw this document. So here you go tonight. But included in the document is the Park and Recreation field allocation policies, the use of field rules, as well as a memo dated from 2009 from Public Works regarding the maintenance of Board of Education infrastructure. As I said, Mike, I don't believe any of you saw any of those documents. When I spoke with Joe Siciliano, who's the Director of Parks and Recreation, gave me the following information, which is based on the questions that the board asked last November. Since that time, that I received that information, I've also spoken with Dan Watson, and he stated that there seems to be a revived spirit of cooperation between his department and the grounds division, which is managed by Tim Coughlin. So that's very positive going forward. Mr. Siciliano and I also agreed to meet on a regular basis, and if problems did come up that could not be solved between Dan and Tim, that we would get involved. So that was another nice step forward. We also talked about the amount of rain that took place this spring and how it was almost impossible to maintain the fields, which is a valid point, and I don't think it's just it was an excuse. I think it's a valid point. But I also learned last year 28,000 hours of permits were issued for the fields. That he's unable to accommodate all requests for fields except for Board of Ed and Parks and Rec programs. Those are accommodated 100% of the time. Each organization that uses the fields must submit a roster so we know that we are serving our residents first. Organizations typically pay per person to use the fields. This revenue goes directly to the town general fund. There is a turf field rental at Coscott Park of $30. But as Joe pointed out, we charge him for our gyms and he charges us for his ice rink. So it kind of works out a little bit that way. We have the director of, I don't even know what Tim's formal title is, but he walks the fields every day and on weekends to determine if they are playable. So after a rain, after snow, whatever, Tim's on the fields. He also pointed out that if there are splinter groups that break away from the current organizations that use our fields, they must present their case to the Board of Parks and Recreation. Typically, they are not given field space as we already provide the programs that they're splintering away from. Parks and Recs has sheds in each part of our town, and they are assigned to maintain fields and like properties in their assigned school, assigned areas. Parks and Rec over the years, since we entered in this agreement, has lost 23 positions. That includes 8 park gardeners and a tree crew. All work orders for fields and all school grounds go through the school due process, so they will become prioritized by Dan and Tim, and the first basis for priority is safety. And that's what I learned so far, but I still have some questions that I want to be answered.
And we probably have more for you. Dr. Francis.
So I have to say I probably didn't read actually every item on here, but I kind of looked through about 90%. And as I was looking through them, what occurred to me is I don't think my issue is with the agreement. It's with the fact that it seems like a lot of times it's just not being done very well. And so, I think the question of, lost positions, how much are they charging, for people that are not school related, how is it that we as the Board of Education, as the education side of it, can impress upon them or have some consequence if they're not being well maintained. And that I don't see anywhere in here, and I don't know exactly how that can happen. Now, it's great that now that we've sort of publicly brought it up and sort of talking about it, that it's getting better. But I think that's, to me, more the issue. It's not that there's a fundamental problem with the agreement. It's that we can't choose to use another vendor. We can't, have a consequence. We can't not pay, whatever it may be. We have no way of addressing it when it's not being done well.
Ms. Tatum.
So I was going to say that I strongly believe there should be a formal dispute resolution process built into this agreement. It would serve both bodies well, and it would show the steps that must be followed if we believe we're not getting value for money, if we're not getting the type of quality that we expect. I think the drainage on the fields is a complete disaster. That's a personal view. I also worry that DPW, for some reason, has Parks and Rec people under their supervision on the snow removal. And that's bound to create problems. It's just very poor management. Doesn't make any sense. Third thing is, I'd like to revisit having the custodian do any snow removal. I'd rather have it clean cut. Who's doing snow removal? Let that be DPW. Keep our custodian on the inside so that there can't be problems, so that there can't be disputes. And those days when the principals say, oh, I'd like to work from home, it's not safe to travel the roads, but I have a custodian I have to supervise. All of these things are interlocking pieces to a puzzle, and I would rather have clear-cut responsibilities between the different groups.
Ms. Raven, then Mr. Scher.
No?
Mr. Scher.
Let me supplement what you've uncovered, Ralph, because I can fill in a couple blanks here. This agreement, there's another revision to this. I brought this up, I should back up. I brought this up last board meeting, because I thought you said there was a revision last year. Okay, when you said that, you said it, you may not know it, but you said last year, I was like, wait a minute, that one never came to the board. Why didn't that come to the board? This revision, this board doesn't realize it, but they know about this. Because in this revision that was done by Jim Rickey, there's actually a little revision beforehand that was done by Ben Brannion when he was our operating officer before he moved across to the other building. You may want to ask Ben about it. It's not really material. The way this came up to the board, that the board looked at this agreement, and it was brought up in a meeting, and people were told, if you're interested in reading it, just call Jim Rickey and he'll send you the agreement. It came up in the context of two things that were before the board in 2000, either 16 or 17. One was when Jim Rickey for the first time brought up Hamilton Avenue Field, there was a discussion of how did all the dirt slide down the hill onto the playing field? How did that happen? Because Parks and Rec is supposed to maintain that so that that should not have happened. The board, some members who were on the board might now remember this conversation. The second reason it came up is in that year, in the capital plan, we had Parks and Rec putting into the capital plan major proposals for capital improvements to our schools. They put in a proposal the year that I was chair, $1 million proposal to turf the entire back of the Western middle school, and we had never seen that proposal. They were doing that under the aegis of what Ms. Dayton was talking about and what others were talking about, how that's what they wanted for their Parks and Rec, okay? And their reasoning, I asked Ben Brannion, who was then at the town, why are they doing this? Under what authority do they think they have the right to make capital proposals for our facilities? And his answer was, because in this matrix, there's an item called maintenance. And I think it's a thing that says who's responsible, who advises, who owns. They own maintenance. So Mr. Parks and Rec said, oh, well, that's right, we can decide what we want to do. Now this became an even bigger issue, just want to add to this, is maybe some of you aren't remembering during start time, for those of you on the start time committee, there was a discussion about what was the proposal that Parks and Rec was making. Okay, they went out and spent money to have a preliminary engineering done to redo the fields at Central Middle School. They refused at that time to share that and bring that to the board. They just said that is more or less none of your business, and we're not sharing it with you. That resulted in a conversation that I had at that time with Peter Tessie, and I said, because Peter's in charge of Parks and Rec, and I said, Peter, this can't be. And it got fixed, ultimately. The reason I give you that background is that this agreement does need to be updated. There is confusion, in my mind. We shouldn't rely on just the goodwill of people working together to resolve that confusion. It should be made much more clear. This is essentially an outsourcing agreement. And for those of you who work in business, you would never write an outsourcing agreement like this that did not have much clearer responsibilities and much clearer metrics for performance and accountability. You would also have a dispute resolution process clearly outlined, and you would also have essentially penalties for non-performance. Now, I don't know how you do penalties for non-performance between two town entities, but it's amazing to me that this agreement exists and there are no measurements whatsoever that the other party is responsible to perform for the Board of Ed in that agreement. It's not measured anywhere. So I wanted to clear that up. If anybody in the administration wants to take this on, I would hope that we would revise this agreement. And you know what, Ralph? The good news about outsourcing agreements is performance measurements, accountability, and dispute. They're never a problem if the outsourcer is performing. So I think we should get that in there. It's really important because we do hear from time to time lots of issues with performance. The last thing I just want to highlight is in that agreement, you guys should read this if you haven't read it, is the language that describes, essentially sets up the precedent, which by the way, we're not following for a lot of different reasons, that schools are to schedule all of their facilities, and whatever is left over is what Parks and Rec can use. I will tell you, when you dig into the management, particularly if you go talk to our athletic director and how they've negotiated that, we're in a little bit different place. Parks and Rec thinks they're entitled to a certain amount of our fields, and they, because we use their fields, they use that as a lever. I think that relationship, and talking to Gus, particularly in start time, may have fallen a little bit out of balance, and it's probably worth a review. Should be done, of course, in a cooperative way, not a confrontational way, but it's important that that gets reviewed because we have to support our schools first and foremost, and our athletic programs and all of the other programs that we have first and foremost. Just total input on this subject.
So we had a discussion about, who gets the field, first, and our discussion was very clear about that. When we're done, when Greenwich High School is done with their fields and Parks and Rec can have, not until then. So it doesn't matter if Greenwich High School's not done until 10 o'clock at night. They're keeping their field until they're done.
Perfect.
So that was very clear. The other part is state law says that we own our property.
Yep. This
is our property, and no one can do anything to our property without our consent. So anybody that wants to come and turf a field or anything, they'd have to get our consent to do that. And that's deeply embedded in state law. So I don't understand where that piece is coming from.
You should just follow up on that item with Ben.
But they can that's their job, is to maintain the field, but not to.
Well, they viewed, just to answer your question, they viewed turfing a field as, gee, that wouldn't be a great idea to improve the maintenance of it. And I was like, guys, I don't think that's what people meant by maintenance. It was what they were choosing to interpret as maintenance. I don't know if it's an issue anymore. I just give it to you as background. It may have all gone away. I just wanted to share the
board of Parks and Rec voted, it's in their minutes that they voted that they still want to turf all three middle school fields.
Fortunately, they're just advisory.
Good luck.
Exactly. So I guess it's the lawyer in me, but basically we have an agreement in front of us that was never voted on by our board. The original agreement's 20 years old. In my mind, I'm where Peter is. We need a refresh and an update. Basically, we would take what's working for us, come to an agreement with Parks and Rec, and tear everything old up and replace it with new workable agreement. But I will point out a couple of things. One is the number of people that Parks and Rec has cut is basically equivalent to the number of people that were shifted over to them for the maintenance of our properties. It is basically a 1-for-1. Another, I've noticed this for a long time being at various fields for various events, but my son's 5th grade graduation was at Julian Curtis School, and that day I took pictures of there's 2 baseball diamonds. One of the baseball diamonds is a baseball diamond that the town rents out through Parks and Rec. The other is the one for school use. Which one do you think was pristine? So I sent some pictures of it over to Joe and over to Peter Tessie, and I got a response back from somebody in the Parks Department who basically said, we're poised to clean up the fields that went to weed this summer. The reason they went fallow was they had ceased to be programmed for games, so they weren't being prepared for play, meaning they're not renting them out. They tend to revert very quickly. However, we do have a program in place to utilize our staff as well as contractors to stay on top of the situation. The work is slated to begin this Thursday, July 5th. You should notice marked improvements. True to the word, they did the work, but only because we asked, right? If we have to have our staff continually putting in tickets about the conditions of the field, I would say to you, Ralph, and Dan, you're listening, do it. Constantly do it. Because if they don't show up to do the work, it basically proves the point. We're in it together. we get the prioritization. We get the use of our fields first, and they get what's left over. But if the fields are not in a condition that they're usable when they're returned to us, then maybe we shouldn't be letting them use our fields. As I look at the matrix in the agreement that was never brought to the board, I do want to know, under natural turf maintenance / improvements, the managing responsibility is Parks and Rec, the budget location is Parks and Rec, and the comments, these are their comments, e.g. drainage, infield, irrigation, leveling, sod replacement. You all may remember we have to go re-level the Ham Ave field. Maybe that should be coming from the Parks and Rec pocket, not the Board of Ed pocket. Ms. O'Neill and Ms. Dayton.
So to build on what Peter and Peter have said is that I think we need, first of all, I think we need a list of what are our fields? Is this Havemeyer field our field?
Right.
So how is that? Well, all right, so that's. All right, so, okay, so we need a list of our fields. We should get the maintenance schedule for our fields. We should also know what the income is per field, so that we have a record of what is being used in our fields. I've sat on several park committee meetings where they rent out the fields, like we got a spare hour and someone wants to, has flag football or whatever, without any consideration of what else is going on in that building at that time, traffic issues or anything. It's just, we got a space, we can fill it. And so I think we also need to be careful about our tennis courts, because it's talking about putting bubbles on them and doing all sorts of other things. So we should have a list of the tennis courts that belong to the Board of Ed and make sure that they're being maintained, if that's in any agreement. I'm not sure, but it should be.
It's in their list, it's in their matrix.
So I think they're overused, and I think there should be some agreement as to how much use they should get based on some kind of prior use, the condition that they are now. And also they set fees. I have no idea how they set the fee, but I don't know why they're setting fees for rental of our property without any consultation with us whatsoever.
And they go up every year.
They go up. People say they're a lot. I don't know, but you say, well, they should know what income they're getting per field, and then we should know what kind of maintenance that they're doing. I understand they don't get the money, it goes to the town, but if you're providing the town with X number of dollars, then I think you then have some basis for saying we need X number of dollars to take care of these fields.
I just want to put a fine point on snow removal. I want the track, those words spelled out in the document, the track. It's not there. Second of all, if snow removal isn't done by Parks and Rec, here's what happens. And everyone should immediately forget they heard this. What happens is, immediately forget it. An unnamed coach will tell their unnamed players to get some snow shovels and start clearing the field of snow. You can imagine the liability. You can imagine the things that could go wrong with the scenario of 40 teenage men with snow shovels clearing the field of snow. So there are serious problems. There are risks involved when the people who don't do the work, who don't show up and fulfill their responsibilities, someone's going to get it done, but we don't want that to happen. So let's make sure that the Greenwich High School property is cleared of snow.
Ms. Raven.
I am open to the page, Jennifer, where it talks about DPW and using Parks and Recs and snow. And the agreement is 1998. And the reason why I was looking at it is Ralph and I were at the XCOM meeting. Was it this week?
Yeah, this week.
And the lines in between the parking spaces were painted, but because they were made tighter, and the original lines weren't blacked over. So that you could still see them, so it's causing all kinds of havoc in parking and double parking. Well, it's in this agreement, it's DPW. So my point is we might want to be looking at the agreement with DPW simultaneously.
That's a good time to take it all on. And anything 20 years old is worth a book.
Well, climate change is probably
There's no such thing as global warming. Let's move on. Other discussion on this topic? Ralph, do you feel like you have enough direction from the members? You're ready to go? All right. Mr. Mayor, the man for the job. Thank you. All right. Don't wait. All right. Thank you. If there's nothing else, we will move on to the 2 action items. So the first action item is the live streaming for GHS athletic program. Mr. Mayo, I'm going to turn to you on that one.
Okay. We have a outside organization, the Greenwich Athletic Foundation, that would like to donate live streaming to Greenwich High School. It is a 3-year contract. The folks from Livestream would come to Greenwich High School. They'd put up cameras. They would take care of all the equipment. We would have no responsibility with that. Shake your head if I'm doing something wrong. Okay. We have been going back and forth with the town attorneys on this contract for 6 to 7 months now. We finally were able to talk Livestream into taking a whole bunch of language out of their contract. They wanted us to be liable in case they put up a camera and then a windstorm came and the camera fell and hit someone. So they took all that stuff out of their contract. So we're finally here in January, when we should have probably been doing this back in August. So I'm sorry for the delay, but previously there was a company that did all of this for free for all the teams in our league, the FCI, Han, but they went out of business. So that's when Livestream.
That's what free.
Yeah. You do it for free. So that's when Livestream came, and this would be a great way for people who are unable to see a game, get to a game, see their grandchildren, whatever. So I'm really supportive of this. The other caveat here is, even though it's a 3-year contract, we can back out after a year if we're not. So if the funding's not there, if the GAF goes away, we can back out.
Mr. Sheriff.
I'm going to move, just to get it on the table, I'm going to move that we accept the gift and we do it expeditiously.
So, motion for Mr. Sheriff, second for Dr. Francis. Do you want to speak to it, or you want to?
No, I think we should be cautious here. This is a great thing. It's a great gift. To your point, we need to be careful with making it so onerous and difficult for people to give us reasonable gifts. This is bordering on that with the legal that's gone back and forth. But it needed to be done. It's now finished. It's great news. We should be as expeditious as possible. And I think we should also be careful not to completely second guess a legal review that has already been done. I'm sure they've worried about other issues like privacy and other kinds of things. I'm sure people may have questions about that, but we should be careful about. I want to rely on the advice and counsel that's already been received and been exercised for months.
Dr. Francis.
So I agree. I did have privacy on my list, and I'm just going to say it out loud. I mean, my sense is these are public games typically, or public events. So I think we're fine from a privacy perspective, but I just kind of wanted to make sure that was correct and that we're okay with that. I don't think we actually even need the consent of the players, given that it's a public engagement, but I just wanted to be sure.
Anyone could buy a ticket. So
right. And then the other thing, which I think you also answered, but just to be clear, as you said, if the funding goes away, we can stop. And just to be clear that after 3 years, if the funding goes away, this doesn't bind us in any way to continue. So I think other than that, and I figured those were both going to be fine.
Ms. Stowe.
So just to be clear, they've given us funding just for the first year, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, but we can figure it out in the next 2, or hopefully it'll come back. Okay.
Just a quick question on so the equipment is basically permanently installed, so who turns it on and off?
I have no idea, Peter. I can't answer that question.
The people making that move.
Yes.
I can answer that question. We control all the programming.
Oh,
So for Greenwich High School, say, we could be running 3 events simultaneously, and basically they turn, we say we would like this one to be run, and they take responsibility at their place. They control it, they're empty on site. For the 3 ones that are permanent, there is one that's portable, but the 3 that are permanent, they basically control it from wherever their office is. I think they're out of Stanford. So, but we're the ones who control all the programs. We'd like this game, we'd like this game, we'd like this game.
The other benefit that I'm sorry, I forgot to mention is that if we wanted to, if we wanted to spend a little extra money, we could have all our performances in the PAC televised as well. Or any other kind of activity we'd like.
That would be a step up, because our AV in there, I should say that's not fair. The AV in there is great, thanks to a gift. Our AV in there is great, thanks to a gift. But the video recording capability of performances needs dramatic improvement. If you've ever seen one of the tapes of the concerts, they're great to listen to, they're not so great to look at.
Ms. O'Neill.
I was just wondering if there was any requirements that we had to meet because of ADA?
I think we've already talked, Kim's talked to, I forget what Kim talked to, I think Gus, and Gus said that they do closed caption, so yeah, we're okay there.
So we're going to be compliant.
Ms. Dayton.
I am curious, as a data person, as to whether we'd like to capture the number of views on these events. Does that have any benefit to you? If not, let's not do it. Is that something that's provided? I would think they would be able to tell us. Okay.
All right, any other discussion? So now we've got a motion on the table to accept the gift of live streaming for 1 year, with a 3-year contract and an option to get out. All right, all those in favor? 8, passes 8-0, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the interim appropriation request for the PAC Gallery at the high school. Mr. Mayo.
I think I've talked about this more times than I've talked about my daughter's upcoming wedding. Let's put it that way. Back on December 12th, a flexible connection in our heating system burst, and that connection was in a wall. So it was not actually in a ceiling soffit, not a wall. And so I have to say, because I've been saying every time we talk about it, it's not a maintenance issue. It could be something wrong with that part. It could be whatever, but it was not a maintenance issue. At that time, Rick Piotrowski was actually on the scene. Water was coming out of that pipe. We didn't even know where the water was coming from because it was coming out at 180 degrees and it was pure steam in there. So we couldn't even find out where the water was coming from. The Greenwich Fire Department saved us one more time. So kudos to the fire department. They had to, once we were able to turn our water off, they were able to pump a lot of water out of there so that our guys could get in there and start cleaning up. There was a concert scheduled for that night. We had the concert. We let people in through the side doors, and we had the fire marshal there, and he approved that. So we've been working on that project since that time. I'll give you an update on where we are. We had Werner Construction come. We told them just come right over from Costco when you're done and just join us over here at the PAC, and they did, which was cool. And they were able to get a lot of work done. They were there that night. And the construction company for the gym floor was there the next day. The gym floor is taking longer than we expected because we're not their only customer. It's not about money, it's about the availability of their crews. So gym floor, we're hoping for Go ahead, Dan.
We're hoping for Thursday.
All right, so we're hoping for,
April 30th. We are
we're hoping for
very
Thursday,
happy
so that's
with
a,
progress.
and we are hoping that maybe the third week in January that the pack will be completed. So that's the appropriation we're going to be asking for, which is $588,000 with my glasses.
36.
536 with my glasses, better. The majority of this, the town is going to be, at the most, will be paying $25,000 out of deductible for their insurance. I spoke about this morning at the at a BEP meeting, the audit committee. We spoke about it on, what night was it?
Tuesday night.
Tuesday night, and we're going to speak about it again on Monday night. But that's what's going on at the PAC, and you guys have the most updated information that we have. It's but we're still looking at that piece to determine if it was installed incorrectly, if it was the wrong piece to put in, and we're also looking. There's 16 other. Is it 16, Dan? 16. Yeah, 16 other parts just like this one in the PAC, and what those parts do is they reduce the noise, and we're looking at all 16. Pieces, so to make sure that there's nothing going on there. So there we are.
Dr. Francis.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the interim appropriation request, estimated at $536,000. And I would like to add thank you very much to everybody who's been working so hard on this.
Any discussion? Ms. Dayton.
Dan, this will show my ignorance. Just go right ahead and point it out. Is there not an automatic shut-off system that we could devise in the failure of a part that
Is there one available? Is that what you're saying? Yes, there's this.
when the insurance company pays us the money and we go back in there and we rectify whatever was wrong in the beginning, can we add a new feature that's an automatic shutdown?
At a cost, correct.
Okay,
Yes,
so
we could.
would the cost be such that we would recoup from another failure at least most of the money?
That's difficult to say. When you have significant amount of pipes, even if you have an automatic shut off at point A,
Okay.
you still have the distance from point A throughout the school that when it's shut off, that water has to drain out. That could be thousands of gallons of water. So yes, there is an automatic shut off. And we are looking into it right now for the new lab building, just because we have the opportunity to put it in. Some areas are still open.
If the water kept coming after the pipe burst, the water kept coming out for
Even after they turn it off.
even after about an hour, at least an hour.
Other questions, discussion? All right, motion on the table is to approve the interim appropriation request of $536,000. All those in favor? Passes 8-0. Thank you. Dr. Francis, do you have another motion to make?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Mr.
Can I just make one comment?
Well, all right, come to the mic.
I really have to commend basically all the agencies in the town of Greenwich for this to occur at about 6:15, 6:20. And I was on the site. I was there within 20 seconds when it started. And the amount of hot water that came out and was flowing freely for us to be able to continue a basketball game, to finish the basketball game, and to pull off a concert that was 10 minutes delayed. And in addition, get it all cleaned up and have hot water for the whole rest of the building and have normal school today, the next day, is really a testimony of how well, when all the town agencies get together and work together, we can do wonders. And I'd also like to commend Dan in terms of what he has done. It has been extraordinary with his crew to get us at this point in time of where the pack is at this moment and where the floor is at this moment. How do people understand the amount of work and how hard it is to get us to this point in time? So I'd really like to give them some kudos.
with that, Dr. Francis, you had that motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second on that? Ms. Wilson, all those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.